The world of professional wrestling has always been built on stories of legacy, tradition, and the bonds that connect families across generations. For decades, we have witnessed remarkable moments where the children of legendary wrestlers step into the squared circle, carrying with them the weight of their family's accomplishments and the expectations that come with bearing a name that has defined an entire era of sports entertainment. One such story has just begun to unfold in the most unexpected of places, and it carries with it profound implications for the future of WWE's developmental brand and the broader landscape of professional wrestling as a whole. On the 11th of August in the year 2026, something extraordinary happened on the NXT programming that would reverberate through the entire wrestling community. The episode that aired that evening was unlike any other, filled with the kind of spontaneous chaos and unpredictability that reminds us why we love professional wrestling in the first place. While the planned programming featured Grayson Waller and Cruz Montana engaged in what was expected to be a straightforward battle for positioning as the #1 contender to the NXT Championship, fate had other plans in store. In a moment that would become the defining image of the evening, a figure emerged from the crowd, a presence so commanding and undeniable that it immediately shifted the entire trajectory of the show. This figure was a 26-year-old powerhouse whose very arrival seemed to carry with it generations of wrestling history. The man who stepped into that ring represented something far greater than just another wrestler looking to make a name for himself. He was a living embodiment of a dynasty that has fundamentally shaped the landscape of professional wrestling for decades upon decades. The Samoan wrestling family, a group that has produced some of the most dominant and beloved figures in the history of WWE, has left an indelible mark on the industry. From the earliest days of their prominence to the present moment, members of this family have consistently elevated themselves to championship status and cultural significance that extends far beyond the wrestling business itself. The young man who made his entrance that evening was Zilla Fatu, and while the name Zilla Fatu might not have been immediately recognizable to every casual viewer who tuned in that night, the significance of his arrival quickly became apparent to anyone with even a passing knowledge of professional wrestling history. Zilla Fatu carries within him the legacy of his father, the legendary Umaga, a wrestler whose physical dominance and fearsome presence made him one of the most intimidating forces ever to step foot inside a WWE ring. Umaga was not just another wrestler. He represented a certain era of sports entertainment where raw power, cultural pride, and undeniable presence could elevate someone to main event status and championship consideration. When Zilla Fatu announced his presence to the NXT universe that evening, he did so not through some elaborate spoken promo or carefully choreographed segment. Instead, he used the most direct form of communication available to a professional wrestler: action. He declared to everyone watching, including the NXT champion Tony D'Angelo, that a new authority figure had arrived in the territory. The way he made this declaration, the physicality he displayed, and the sheer confidence with which he carried himself immediately suggested that this was no rookie trying to find his way. This was someone who understood the business at a fundamental level, someone who comprehended what it meant to carry a family name into competition. What made this moment even more significant was the fact that certain key individuals were watching from afar, observing this debut with the kind of attention that only comes when something truly noteworthy is occurring. Haku, known throughout the wrestling world as the Tongan King, a figure who has cast a long shadow over professional wrestling for approximately half a century, was observing these events. Haku represents an older generation of wrestling royalty, a man whose reputation for toughness and legitimacy has never been questioned in the slightest. More than just an elder statesman, Haku has been actively involved in recent wrestling developments as a member and apparent patriarch of the MFT, a faction that has been making waves in WWE programming. The MFT, comprised largely of Haku's own sons, Tama Tonga and Tala Tonga, has represented a continuation of family legacy within the contemporary wrestling landscape. These individuals have carried forward the family tradition of excellence and have positioned themselves as significant players in the power structures of WWE. When Zilla Fatu made his debut, Haku watched from behind the scenes, and it becomes clear that this watching was far from passive observation. The Tongan King was studying the young Samoan wrestler, perhaps recognizing something in his presence and demeanor that connected to his own experiences and family traditions. The relationship between different wrestling dynasties has always been complex and multi-layered. Professional wrestling exists in a space where respect, honor, and acknowledgement of lineage hold tremendous importance. When Zilla Fatu stepped into that NXT ring on that historic evening, he was not simply engaging in a physical altercation with two fellow wrestlers. He was making a statement that extended far beyond the immediate confrontation. The Samoan splashes that he delivered to both Waller and Montana were executed with a precision and power that spoke to years of training and preparation. But more significantly, after he had disposed of these two competitors, he turned his attention to the championship that adorned the waist of Tony D'Angelo, and in that moment, he was making clear his immediate aspirations. However, threading through the entire narrative of his debut was something far more nuanced and meaningful than a simple challenge for championship gold. Zilla Fatu was operating within a complex web of family dynamics, wrestling traditions, and deeply rooted respect systems that have always defined the sport. As he locked his gaze upon the NXT champion, he was simultaneously acknowledging the presence of Haku, the patriarch of the Tongan wrestling family. This acknowledgement was not one born of fear or submission. Rather, it carried the weight of genuine respect between families who understand the business and the traditions that bind them. In the hours following the conclusion of that NXT episode, something remarkable occurred that further illustrated the significance of Zilla Fatu's arrival in WWE. Armando Estrada, a figure with deep historical connections to Zilla's father Umaga, broke his silence on social media. Estrada had once served as the manager and representative of Umaga during his WWE tenure, and he understood firsthand the capabilities and the presence that the Fatu family possessed. When Estrada responded to news of Zilla's debut, he did so with remarkable simplicity, posting the single word hello on his social media account. In the context of their shared history, this greeting carried enormous weight and meaning. It was not merely a casual acknowledgement. It was a recognition from someone who had stood beside wrestling royalty, someone who had witnessed firsthand the capabilities of Zilla's legendary father, and who was now observing the emergence of the next generation. The training that Zilla Fatu received prior to his WWE debut deserves particular attention and consideration. He had been prepared for his professional wrestling career by Booker T, a legendary figure in his own right who achieved the highest levels of success in professional wrestling. Booker T is a two-time WWE Hall of Famer whose credentials and accomplishments span multiple wrestling companies and multiple decades of active competition at the highest levels. The fact that Booker T, someone of his stature and experience, had taken the time to train Zilla Fatu speaks volumes about the potential that was being recognized in the younger wrestler. When Zilla made his debut on NXT programming, Booker T was present at the commentary desk, watching his student make his first official appearance in WWE competition. This presence was not coincidental. It represented a form of endorsement and validation from someone whose opinion carries tremendous weight within the wrestling community. The personal dynamics surrounding Zilla Fatu's debut became even more touching when his mother's reaction to the events came to light. Following the airing of the episode, Zilla's mother revealed publicly that she had been completely unaware that her son was going to make his debut on that particular evening. She had not known beforehand that he would be appearing on national television, which means that her presence in the crowd represented a genuine moment of surprise and emotional impact. When she spoke about the experience afterward, she expressed enthusiasm about the fact that her son had been placed in the NXT developmental brand, citing her respect for Booker T and her confidence that being trained by someone of his caliber would provide her son with the best possible foundation for his wrestling career. The decision that Zilla Fatu made regarding his initial placement within WWE carries profound meaning when viewed from a larger perspective. There was every reason to believe that a wrestler of his pedigree, someone carrying the Samoan name and the legacy that comes with it, would have been immediately promoted to the main roster. The main roster of WWE has always been the place where established stars operate and where the highest levels of championship accomplishment are pursued. More specifically, there was the possibility, perhaps even the expectation in some quarters, that Zilla Fatu would have been integrated into the Bloodline, the dominant faction that has defined a significant portion of recent WWE programming. The Bloodline represents a particular branch of the Anoa'i family, the larger Samoan wrestling family, and operates under the leadership of Roman Reigns, who has positioned himself as the tribal leader of this group. The Bloodline has accumulated championships, power, and influence through coordinated action and family unity. For a young Samoan wrestler of Zilla's potential, joining the Bloodline would have represented an immediate path to relevance and opportunity. However, Zilla Fatu made a different choice, one that reflects both wisdom and a commitment to establishing his own identity and legacy. Rather than immediately joining the ranks of the main roster or accepting a position within the existing Bloodline structure, he chose to begin his WWE journey in NXT, the developmental brand where future stars are methodically built and refined. This choice deserves serious consideration and analysis. Starting in NXT rather than on the main roster represents a commitment to the process of professional development. It suggests that Zilla Fatu understood the value of establishing a foundation, of being taught the WWE system, and the particular ways in which the company approaches professional wrestling storytelling and character work. While some observers might argue that a wrestler of his family background and natural abilities could have bypassed developmental and immediately competed at the main event level, Zilla's decision to embrace NXT suggests a different philosophy. He was choosing to forge his own distinct path rather than simply walking into an established role that had been presumably prepared for someone of his lineage. The implications of this choice extend beyond the immediate career considerations of Zilla Fatu himself. In choosing to begin in NXT, he was making a statement about respect for the process and for the legitimate development of wrestling ability and character work. He was also, perhaps strategically, establishing an independent identity separate from the larger Anoa'i family structure. While he was certainly aware of his connections to the Samoan dynasty and the tremendous advantages that came with bearing his family name, he was also asserting his agency and his commitment to building something of his own. During his debut segment, Zilla Fatu's attention eventually turned to Tony D'Angelo, the current NXT champion. The championship represents the pinnacle of success on the developmental brand, the ultimate achievement that any wrestler performing in NXT can aspire to accomplish. By pointing to the championship and declaring his intention to pursue it, Zilla was establishing clear and immediate goals. He was indicating that he had not come to NXT to slowly climb the ranks or to gain experience for its own sake. Rather, he had arrived with ambition and with the clear intention of reaching the top of the developmental territory. The narrative underpinning Zilla's debut also carries a subtle but significant cultural and familial dimension. His presence and actions represented a tribute to the legacy of the Tongan and Samoan wrestling families that have shaped professional wrestling for generations. When he looked directly at Haku and acknowledged the presence of the Tongan king, he was demonstrating an understanding of the historical importance of wrestling dynasties and their place within the broader context of the sport. This acknowledgement was not begrudging or obligatory. Rather, it carried genuine respect and recognition of Haku's place in wrestling history and his current importance as a patriarch and authority figure. The broadcast commentary and presentation of Zilla's debut was crafted in such a way that emphasized the historical significance of the moment. The connection between him and the larger Samoan dynasty was constantly referenced and reinforced, creating a narrative framework that positioned his arrival not simply as the debut of another young wrestler, but as a meaningful moment in the ongoing story of one of professional wrestling's most important families. The musical cues, the visual presentation, and the way his actions were discussed all contributed to the sense that something truly significant was occurring. As wrestling fans and observers process the information regarding Zilla Fatu's debut and consider his future trajectory within WWE, several important questions naturally emerge. Some wrestling analysts and commentators have suggested that perhaps Zilla Fatu should have bypassed the developmental process entirely and been immediately positioned on the main roster, where his family background could immediately be monetized and utilized. Others have noted that professional wrestlers are typically at their prime competitive age in their late 20s and early 30s, and that at 26, Zilla still has the opportunity to spend time in developmental without losing momentum or relevance. The personal training relationship with Booker T represents another significant factor in evaluating Zilla's debut and trajectory. Booker T has demonstrated throughout his career that he brings not just wrestling knowledge, but also life experience and wisdom to his students. His presence at ringside during Zilla's debut, coupled with his established credentials and his role within WWE as both a performer and an authority figure, positions him as an important mentor and supporter for the young Samoan wrestler. Confidence that Zilla's mother expressed regarding Booker T's involvement further reinforces the sense that important figures in Zilla's corner believe that the developmental process under Booker's tutelage will serve him well. Furthermore, from a storytelling perspective, Zilla Fatu's decision to carve his own path in NXT, rather than immediately joining the bloodline, creates interesting narrative possibilities. Professional wrestling storytelling thrives on tension, conflict, and the unexpected. A Samoan wrestler who enters WWE and immediately joins the existing Samoan family structure would follow a predictable narrative arc. However, a Samoan wrestler who chooses to establish himself independently while maintaining respect for his family's legacy creates a more complex and dramatically rich narrative landscape. This dynamic has the potential to generate interesting storylines both within NXT and potentially on the main roster as his career progresses. The reaction from Armando Estrada, while simple in its presentation, carried significant implications. That a former manager of Umaga would publicly acknowledge Zilla's debut suggests that bridges and connections between generations of the Samoan wrestling family remain intact and respected. It indicates that individuals who worked with Umaga during his prime are continuing to observe and support members of his family as they pursue professional wrestling careers. This continuing chain of recognition and support reinforces the sense that Zilla Fatu is not simply an isolated wrestler trying to make his way in the industry, but rather someone who is connected to a network of respected individuals who understand his background and his potential. When considering the broader context of Zilla Fatu's debut, it is important to recognize that professional wrestling in the modern era exists within an evolving landscape of opportunities and expectations. The rise of alternative wrestling promotions, the growth of international wrestling markets, and the changing dynamics of how professional wrestling is consumed have all created new possibilities for talented wrestlers. Zilla Fatu's choice to begin in WWE rather than to pursue opportunities elsewhere suggests his commitment to WWE as the ultimate destination for his wrestling career. His decision to begin in NXT rather than on the main roster further suggests that he is committed to the WWE process and to establishing himself as a legitimate product of WWE's system. The physical dominance displayed during Zilla's debut was immediately apparent to anyone watching. The Samoan splashes that he executed with such force against Waller and Montana demonstrated the physical tools that he possesses. There was no tentative or cautious quality to his performance. Rather, everything about his presentation suggested confidence, preparation, and the kind of natural physical ability that comes from both genetic predisposition and serious training. These are the physical attributes that have long characterized the great Samoan wrestlers who have competed in professional wrestling over the years. As the wrestling community processes the significance of Zilla Fatu's arrival in NXT, the question of how his presence will affect the existing NXT landscape cannot be ignored. The NXT Championship, currently held by Tony D'Angelo, suddenly faces a new and serious challenger. D'Angelo had been establishing himself as a legitimate champion, conducting the business of his championship in ways that suggested serious protection and promotion of the title. The arrival of Zilla Fatu, with all the baggage of expectation that comes with his family name and his obvious wrestling capabilities, immediately elevates the stakes surrounding the NXT Championship. The philosophical question embedded within Zilla's debut deserves consideration. In professional wrestling, respect and legacy can be demonstrated in multiple ways. Some might argue that the deepest respect for one's family is shown through the pursuit of immediate championship success and the rapid accumulation of accomplishments. However, an equally valid argument can be made that the deepest respect is demonstrated through the willingness to embrace the process, to work with mentors and teachers, and to build something legitimate and earned rather than merely inherited.